important topic and one that doesn't get enough attention. So I'm going to introduce Jessica Parker. She is a speech language pathologist with over 12 years of clinical experience. She specializes in working with adults with brain-related speech, language, and cognitive disorders. Her experience includes working with clients who are interested in regaining functional skills to allow them to better participate in their daily lives, whether at home, at work, or in the community. The focus of her practice is to promote brain healing to improve her clients' ability to communicate and think so they can achieve their real-life communication goals. Jessie, we're thrilled to have you here with us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. The only error in there is that I've been practicing now for only over 18 years. So I think I need to update my website. It's been a few years, apparently. So I'm feeling old, but that's okay. You know, you get older and wiser. But yeah, thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to have a chance to talk about a topic that, from what I'm hearing, you haven't really talked much about. And I think it is an important topic for everyone to know about, the fact that our brains can heal and change and grow every day. So anyone really can benefit from strategies for improving your brain health, but especially when you are dealing with something as major as cancer and chemo and related treatment. So I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate you all for having me. So I'm going to share my screen, and I don't use Zoom every day, so bear with me. I think I've got it here. Yeah, okay. So the reason I call this Build Your Best Brain is because, like I said, there really is a way to improve your brain health overall. In fact, there are many ways. So I'm going to try to keep this within 50 minutes or so you have time to ask questions. But there's a lot of information. So jot your questions down if you have them. I'm happy to answer at the end or even through email later on if something pops up later. I'm happy to help. So I don't know if this is okay. I know you're recording, but I would love it if I could just get a few people to let me know what does chemo brain mean to you? Because there's certainly a medical clinical definition, but I'm wondering if you guys know anything about chemo brain, if you've experienced it, and how you would describe it. So if that's okay, Stephanie, for folks to speak up just here and there, that'd be great.
Yeah, if anybody's comfortable, please feel free. And if you're not, that's okay too. You could put it in the chat.
Absolutely.
And I can read it.
Mm-hmm.
I see inability to focus.
Yes.
Brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to take yourself off mute and say a word, you can, or put it in the chat if there's anybody else who has any other thoughts.
For me, it's the inability to remember simple words and things that I know very, very well in my brain.
Yes. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads on that one too. Okay. Fantastic. So you guys, obviously your experience has taught you a lot because you're hitting the nail right on the head. Chemo brain is cancer-related cognitive impairment or mental fog. Mental fog, we've already heard that tonight. Symptoms include difficulty with memory, as you guys mentioned, paying attention, learning new information, finding words, and finishing and organizing tasks. And interestingly, the symptoms that I just described aren't just caused by the chemo itself. It can be caused by many factors, but it's sort of all lumped together into one term that we call chemo brain. But those symptoms can also be caused by things like radiation, hormone therapy, brain tumors, depression and anxiety, sleep problems, anesthesia, diabetes, high blood pressure, and on and on. Okay, but we're going to lump all of that under chemo brain for this presentation. Okay. There are actually other factors that explain why some people experience chemo brain and some people don't, or some people experience those symptoms more severely than others. In some cases, if you have a predisposition to cognitive decline, that can mean that you may be more likely to experience chemo brain. Or if you have a pre-existing cognitive impairment, the chemo and other treatments can certainly make it worse. We also think that age, stress, and socioeconomic status play a part in whether or not chemo brain affects you and how much it affects you. Now, I want to share a video with you because in order for me to explain exactly what happens with chemo brain and the reason that we experience chemo brain, I want you to understand a little bit about how the brain works. Okay, so let me switch gears here. And I'm going to share a different screen. I'm getting the hang of this, guys. Okay. There we go. And I'm going to play this for you.
Josie, I don't think there's any sound.
Okay, so you can't hear that. Here's what we're going to do. Let's try it this way. I actually brought the speaker in thinking that would be better, but maybe it's worse.
To look at, it resembles a spongy mass of tissue, feels like tofu, and weighs roughly 4 tubs of butter. Our brain is actually made up of mostly water and about 10% fats. While our brain only makes up approximately 2% of the entire body's weight, it uses a massive 20% of the body's energy. The brain's basic building blocks are known as neurons, and we have around 100 billion of these, each with between 1,000 to 10,000 connections to other neurons, creating neural pathways or roads within the brain. There are literally trillions of neural connections within the brain. Similar to a city's electrical power grid, information is passed along these roads through a series of chemical messages and electrical impulses. As all of this activity takes place, our brain generates between 10 to 25 watts of power, enough to power a light bulb. Over the course of one day, your brain generates more electrical impulses from firing neurons than all of the telephones in the world. So really, your brain isn't just a spongy mass of tissue. It's your most complex organ, a power station that connects your every thought, movement, and feeling. And it's firing right now.
Okay. So thanks for bearing with me. Okay, so let's get back to the slides. I think that's a great summary of how the brain works. It obviously is a very complex organ. So to explain how it works takes a lot of time and studying, but I thought that was kind of a good overview. Okay, so moving on here. So I want you to understand what is actually going on in the brain to cause those symptoms that you're experiencing. And what happens is that because of chemo or those other factors that we talked about, there are changes in the brain structures that were mentioned in that video, like the neurons and cells that helps neurons transmit information. So there's a lot of technical terms here, and you can see the image there of the actual neuron and all the different parts. But what I want you to understand is that any of these parts of the cells and the neurons in the brain can be damaged because of chemo and other factors, including increase in fat molecules, inflammation, and abnormal growth of cells, like with a brain tumor. So anytime there's a change in the brain, it's obviously not going to work as efficiently and as accurately as you would want it to. And that's why people experience sort of a general overall fog, because really all parts of your brain can be affected. So hopefully that gives you a little more information about what exactly is happening inside the brain. Unfortunately, over 50% of cancer survivors experience cancer-related cognitive problems. And there aren't currently any FDA-approved drugs to treat chemo brain, although they are doing some trials, and I think they're working toward that. But there is good news. There is good news, and that's why I'm here. Oftentimes, cancer-related cognitive deficits are temporary, and they're trialing some drugs designed to treat other conditions like multiple sclerosis, ADHD, and Alzheimer's that can help to improve symptoms. But what we're really going to talk about tonight is how you can learn strategies to cope with your symptoms and to build your best brain overall. Okay. So I want to break this down into 3 different parts because, like I said, there is a lot of information to take in. And I'm going to be sending you all the slides and several other handouts. So there's really no pressure to take notes or feel like you have to memorize any of this because you can review the slides afterward. Okay. So hopefully that'll help you be able to just focus on what I'm talking about and not feel like you have to also write everything down at the same time. So anyway, the 3 approaches to building your best brain are just general self-care, learning compensatory strategies, and brain exercise. And we're going to go into details in all these areas. Now, within the category of general self-care, we're going to talk about sleep hygiene, rest breaks, relaxation techniques, physical exercise, and hydration. All of these things, even if they sound simple on their own, can have a big impact on your brain health when taken all together. So sleep is important because during sleep, the brain gets rid of toxic byproducts of the body. It replenishes depleted energy reserves, and it generates new neurons and strengthens connections between neurons based on our experiences during the day. So again, if we refer back to the video and think about how your brain consists of billions of neurons, it's really important to make sure those neurons stay healthy, that you make new ones and strengthen connections. That's how we learn, and that's how our brain works better, okay? You can imagine that if sleep is interrupted, this process is interrupted as well. The other important point here is that sleep replenishes depleted energy reserves. The video also talked about how much energy the brain makes, and it can be really good at making energy. But when the brain is not healthy or there are other factors introduced like chemotherapy, the brain can sometimes not be as efficient in generating energy. And if the brain is trying to heal itself, it's using a lot of extra energy to do that. So it becomes even more important for you to sleep and replenish your brain's energy reserves. Okay. So how do you sleep better? Here are some ideas. Promoting sleep hygiene. So one thing that's important is avoid getting too little or too much sleep at night. And one of the handouts I'll send you after the presentation is a chart that gives you information about, based on your age, how much sleep is recommended for you. It can also be important to establish a regular bedtime routine. So getting to bed at the same time every night and waking up at roughly the same time every morning. And I recommend using the bedtime feature within your clock app on iPhones. It's actually a little setting that you can tell your phone to remind you to go to bed. And I actually use it myself, and it's really pretty convenient. You could be sitting there, binging some of these shows and not even realize how late it's gotten. But the bedtime reminder gives you a little alert that says, hey, it's time for bed. And that helps you to stay in that routine. It's also important, obviously, to be as comfortable as possible when you're sleeping. So a good mattress, cool temperature is better than warm temperature, turning off bright lights, using blackout curtains. Those things are pretty self-explanatory and obvious, but taken as a whole, the better your sleep hygiene, the better your brain is going to function. Another important type of rest for your brain are what I call brain breaks, okay? And those would be breaks that you take during the day. So research has taught us that when we sustain our attention for long periods of time, it becomes more and more difficult for us to focus our attention. We start to get distracted. We've all experienced that. But especially when your energy reserves are depleted in the brain, you have less energy to use for paying attention. And so it becomes very important to focus on how you're doing. How are you thinking and feeling when you're doing tasks? If you notice that you're making more mistakes or you're having trouble paying attention, maybe you're getting a headache, it's very likely that your brain is telling you, hey, it's time for a break. And we know, again, through research, all of this is research-based, that taking even short breaks, like 90 seconds, can help maintain your focus and improve problem solving and creativity. Because when you take a 90-second break, it's sort of a way to recharge or reset your brain. The way you would take a break is just to close your eyes, relax, and let your mind divert from the task at hand. Try to clear your mind. That's very hard. But if a thought comes in, you try to let it go and really just clear your mind. I know it's a lot easier said than done. Or if that's not something that feels restful to you, you can even just get up and take a little stroll or walk around the house or go do a different task. But paying attention to how your brain is working is really important, and becoming more aware of the need for these little rests or brain breaks can really improve how you're thinking and feeling throughout the day. Another important factor here in terms of self-care is to learn how to relax. Stress causes a buildup of neurotoxins that negatively impact learning and memory. So the more stressed you are, the more toxic your brain is, which is not good. Okay. That's another thing that sleep helps us with. It helps clear out all those toxins. But if you can have less toxins in there in the first place, that's better, right? So one recommendation for learning to relax is using mindfulness meditation. Some of you may already be familiar with this. This is a hot button issue these days. But, I always thought that whenever you use the word meditation, that sounds really hard. And I think it is. You need to practice it. But the steps for using mindfulness meditation are very simple. You just sit comfortably, pay attention to your breath, and when your attention wanders, return to your breath. So that sounds very simple, I know, and it's much harder in practice, but even doing mindfulness meditation for several minutes a day can significantly decrease your stress, okay? The next suggestion is one that I love, and I'm going to bring it up here on my phone, even though it's on my computer, because I think, well, I'll try it. I just don't want to mess up the sound like I did last time. Okay. So there's actually been research done. Neurologists did research on which music is the most relaxing. And there's actually one song that's been rated the most relaxing song, and it's called Weightless by a group called Macaroni Union, of all things. And I'm going to include this on one of the handouts I'm giving you. I'm going to give you the top 10 most relaxing songs according to this one research, but I'll just play a snippet of this for you because it's kind of cool. Okay, so that's just a little tease, a little taste of what that is. But the whole song is actually 8 minutes long. So, it's a good one maybe to use while you're meditating or anytime. So just remember to check out the list of songs that I'll send you. The last one here is exercise. Now, I am not a physical therapist. I'm not a personal trainer. But I think we all know how important exercise can be. And again, back to research shows that even just a brisk walk can really be the type of exercise that can keep your brain healthy. So it doesn't have to be, overly exerting yourself. It can be something as simple as a walk, but keeping your body moving can be really important for your brain health, but also keeping your body relaxed. Now, on to hydration. I don't know if we know how important hydration is. It's very important. So I found this quote in the research that says being dehydrated by just 2% impairs performance on tasks that require attention, psychomotor, and immediate memory skills. Just 2%. Okay. So how do you know if you're dehydrated? You feel thirsty. So that when I learned this years ago, that sort of blew my mind that once you feel thirst, you're already slightly dehydrated. So if you can actually avoid the feeling of thirst, you're actually keeping your body sufficiently hydrated all the time. Now that's easier said than done, but hydration is not something to sneeze at. This is very important. And the Mayo Clinic has published data about how much water people should drink. So for men, it's about 15.5 cups per day. Women need about 11.5 cups per day, which is actually more than the 8 cups a day that you just sort of hear around that it turns out has no real scientific basis. So one way that can really help you to drink more water is to keep a hydration log where you actually track how much water and other beverages, because other beverages can count too, even if they're caffeinated, actually tracking how much water that you're drinking each day to see if you're coming close to the recommended amounts. So that's another handout that I'll send you so you can try keeping track of your hydration. Okay, so those were some ideas for self-care. Now we're going to talk about compensatory strategies, things that you can do to sort of make up for the difficulties that you're having while you're experiencing brain fog or chemo brain. We're going to start by talking about external memory strategies, decreasing multitasking, prioritizing, and using education and advocacy. Okay. So organization and consistency in general help with memory attention problems significantly. So I almost always recommend a daily planner or phone calendar for my clients that have any type of memory impairments. And that may seem obvious, but I usually recommend that it's used even more than you're used to using it. And I actually prefer a written daily planner because it allows more space to write more information. Now, if you're a very tech-savvy person and you prefer technology, there's absolutely many compensatory strategies that you can find through apps. But I personally like to recommend a use of a daily planner that has a full page for each day or at least each week. That way you have more room to write, because I recommend that not only you write down your appointments, but you also write down the events that you have going on and the tasks that you need to complete. So you actually write the tasks in as if you have an appointment with yourself, like deciding the day and time you're going to go buy a birthday card for Janice. Okay, for example. So really using that planner probably more than you ever used it in the past. I also like the strategy, a place for everything and everything in its place. What that means is a lot of times when we have memory problems, it's very easy to lose track of items that you need, like your phone or the remote control or your glasses or your keys, your purse, you name it, right? So if you start to organize and keep your space consistently laid out, it's easier to keep track of things. So for example, whenever I come home, I put my purse in the hall closet. That way I always know where it is. If I just laid it down wherever, it'd be much harder to find it the next time I needed it. So that's a great rule of thumb for keeping track of those items that you might misplace. Routine in general is really key for improving memory impairments. So, for example, I bet you don't forget to brush your teeth because that's just part of your daily routine. You do it, at night before you go to bed or first thing in the morning, but you don't really have to think about doing it. It just kind of happens automatically. So anytime that you can get yourself into a routine, maybe it's taking medications at exactly the same time every day, or, even going for a walk, you want to incorporate more physical activity. Well, get into a routine, try to do it the same time each day so that it just becomes automatic for you. Then, of course, I recommend using labels and checklists. A perfect example of a checklist that I often recommend is a checklist by the front door that lists all the things you want to take with you each day. So wallet, keys, phone, maybe your walker or something like that. So that before you leave the house, you're looking at your checklist to make sure you have everything with you before you leave for the day. And this is just a taste of some of those memory strategies that I recommend. There are lots out there, but that's a good start. Okay. Something else that becomes really important for our brain health is making sure we're targeting only one task at a time. So you may think of multitasking as this magic skill that some people are very good at, and boy, are they lucky. But it turns out that even people who think they're very good at multitasking are actually much less efficient and less accurate completing all of those tasks. Okay. We also know that multitasking is not really good for our brain. It causes us to use more brain energy and brain resources, and it builds up the stress hormone in the brain. We've already talked about that. That's not good for our brains and can actually impact your memory. So whenever possible, it's important to decrease multitasking, which may mean really breaking a lot of habits that we have because we all do this. We all do. So whenever possible, it's important to eliminate distractions. So for example, you're checking your email while the TV is on in the background. Your brain actually has to work a lot harder to block out the TV while you're writing your email. Okay. There's no need to make it work overtime. It's better to turn the TV off while you write your email, doing one task at a time. Another concept that's also considered multitasking is when you're moving between tasks in rapid succession or not completing a task before moving to something else. So again, let's use the email example. You're writing an email and then you get a text. So then you go over to answer the text and then you're back to the email. Your brain has to use a lot more energy to switch back and forth between tasks. So whenever possible, finish writing that email and then go to the text if it was that important, okay, as opposed to allowing yourself to be interrupted. This can be a real challenge. Like I said, you have habits. So one way to get in the habit of decreasing multitasking is just to set a timer for 15 minutes, 25 minutes. And just during that time, make yourself work on only one task and see if you can do it just for 15 minutes a day. And then the more you practice it, the easier it will become. Another thing I think that helps us multitask is when we have a to-do list. You keep track of the things that need to get done. And by the way, those can go right in your planner if you have enough space on that page. Keep your to-do list so that you can focus on getting individual tasks done and not just sort of jump around from one task to the next because you saw it, right? If you have your plan, you may be more efficient and better at decreasing multitasking. So this is a good segue into talking about prioritization. So if you're using a checklist, it's really a lot easier to prioritize your tasks. It's really important to prioritize the tasks that are important and urgent. And I read in a book, it's referenced in the sources here at the end of the presentation, that talked about how our task list is usually made up of elephants and rabbits. The elephants are those tasks that are really pressing. They have the most weight, so to speak. They're really important, okay? But the rabbits are those little tasks that are kind of easy to get done. They pop up and get your attention and you're like, oh, I'll just do that, Meanwhile, you've got this elephant over here that's going to require a lot more energy and it's a lot more important. But instead, you're choosing to use your brain energy over here on the rabbits that aren't that important. So by keeping a to-do list and then identifying the elephants versus the rabbits, you can choose to do the most important tasks first and not let yourself get distracted by those little rabbits that pop up. Okay. It can be important to accomplish the important tasks, these elephants, when you're feeling your best. And I'm sure you all are very aware of your best time of the day. Perhaps it's in the morning, perhaps it's not, right? But you want to save that time when you're feeling your best for the most important task and not waste your brain energy on those tasks that aren't as important. So some tasks can wait, and don't be afraid to delegate. I think that's important. When you're healing, when your body is healing, it's really important to ask for help. It's also important to ask for help when your brain is healing. So no one's going to look at you and think, boy, you must be experiencing chemo brain. They're not going to be able to see your brain and see those changes, which makes it hard sometimes for people to understand how you're feeling. So, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we are going to talk about this, but it becomes important to educate people about how you're feeling and what you need, and not assume that they understand. And hopefully you have some nuggets of information from this presentation tonight that you can share with them, so that they can better understand chemo brain and how you're feeling. Okay. Oh, good. I was right on it. Yes. Ask for what you need. Okay. Educate them, your family, friends about chemo brain, how it affects you, and then tell people what you need. So that may mean saying no sometimes. Can you come over for dinner on Friday? Well, you might look at your schedule and see that you have 3 doctor's appointments and a visit with your son. Maybe Friday wouldn't be the best night. Okay. So it's okay to say no. Or when you are spending time with people, asking for a break, that little brain break, that's okay to say, hey, you know what? I'm really having trouble focusing on this conversation. Just give me a 2-minute break. I'll be right back. You can just go sit in a quiet room. Or if you don't want to mention that you need a break, just say you need to use the restroom. Nobody's going to ask twice about that, right? That can be a nice break. You can also ask to modify the task or event. So if someone asks you to go out to dinner with them, you could say, well, actually, how about if we grab coffee, right? So it's a shorter amount of time that you're committing to, which may help you with your brain energy and your body's energy, frankly. Again, it's okay to ask for help. Okay, on to our third topic of brain exercise. Brain exercise. So we're going to talk about the concept of neuroplasticity and the idea of what is a complex cognitive task and why that's important. And then I'm going to teach you some research-based exercises. Again, there's a lot of research that goes into all these slides. I'm not just making this up as I go. Okay. So neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to heal. Okay. It's actually pretty amazing how much our brain can heal itself. And we know a lot more about that now in the last, 2 decades or so. But neuroplasticity refers to the practice of your brain making new connections between those neurons that you saw in the video, which changes the way the brain is organized. Okay. A great example of this is studying the visual cortex, which is that little red dot in the back of the brain there in the picture, studying the visual cortex in individuals who are blind. So because individuals are blind, you may assume that that part of their brain is inactive. It doesn't have a job anymore. But it turns out, because of neuroplasticity, for those who are blind, the brain uses that space for other skills, like reading Braille and hearing language. So you probably heard that a lot of times people who are blind have heightened senses and in the other types of senses. And that's because the brain has learned to compensate and to change. So your brain, a person who's experiencing chemo brain, can also change and reorganize and make new connections. And that gives us a lot of hope, right? Because it's not a lost cause. Our brain can be repaired. You just have to learn how to do it and give yourself time to. So one of the great things about neuroplasticity is there's been a lot of research about it. And we now know what we call the principles of neuroplasticity, or what are the rules to follow when trying to promote neuroplasticity in the brain. And we've learned that it's important for the task at hand to be challenging, okay, to require your focused attention. It's helpful if the task is new to you in some way, so it's not just the same old thing day after day. It's helpful to have repetition, so you're practicing skills over time. And it's also important that it's important to you. So salience matters. Engaging in tasks and activities that are important to you are much better for promoting neuroplasticity than something that you're not interested in. And this, from a speech therapist perspective, when I first got out of graduate school 20 something years ago, it was very common for us to use workbooks with, exercises in them, and we'd give the same exercises to every patient. But because of research and understanding neuroplasticity and how the brain works, we've really changed the way we do therapy. Now, therapy is very individualized for each patient. One of the first questions I ask when I do an evaluation is, what are you interested in? What motivates you? Because I'm going to base all of my treatment techniques and exercises on what you're interested in, because we know that that promotes neuroplasticity more than engaging in something that, frankly, you find boring. Okay. So the first principle of neuroplasticity is engaging in complex tasks, things that are challenging and difficult. So I gave you some ideas here for how to challenge your brain. Anytime you're coming up with new ideas or learning new skills, you're engaging in a complex cognitive task, and that is fantastic for your brain. So maybe you've always wanted to learn to play the piano or to speak French. Now's the time. Now's the time to learn a new skill. Why not? Okay. It can even be a lot more simple than that. It could be watching a news story. Maybe you watch the news each evening, and then instead of just watching the news and leaving it at that, you could engage your brain, challenge your brain by having a conversation with someone about the information that you learned, but go further than just retelling the facts. Ask questions like, did you agree or disagree with the outcome? Can you think of a better way to solve the problem than what they talked about on the news, right? You're using your brain in a complex way to solve problems and come up with new ideas. It's really, really healthy for your brain and promotes neuroplasticity. Even just changing your daily routines and doing things in a different way can be good. So taking a different route when you're going home, you always go the same way, but you probably know a couple other ways you could go. Why not? Or brushing your teeth with the opposite hand. Instead of the right hand, use the left hand. When paying your bills, do the math in your head and then check it with a calculator, of course, because you always want to be sure. But just doing it in a different way can be very effective for challenging your brain. I think it's also very important, that principle of salience. It's important to stay engaged with the activities and hobbies that you enjoy, even if you need to modify them. So you may find that your energy levels are different now. It's hard to participate in the activities that you once enjoyed. But if you can find a way to participate in some way, a small way, that's really important for your brain health. So for example, if you used to make quilts every Christmas, but this year it's just seems too much, maybe instead of making quilts, you could make a scarf or a coaster or something smaller. So you're still engaging in that task that you find enjoyable, but you're modifying it. I get questions a lot about the training software that's out there. There's Lumosity, Brain HQ, FitBrains, all of these, the software programs or apps that usually require a monthly subscription and can get pretty expensive. And they often promise a lot of things, that their exercises can improve your brain activity. And there's actually been research to study whether that's true or not. And it turns out maybe, maybe not. They may not actually accomplish all the things they promise. And it turns out that, like I mentioned, exercises that involve real world activities, things that you're actually interested in, are better at promoting neuroplasticity. But I would say if you don't have a way to engage your brain in a lot of complex cognitive thinking, maybe you're retired, maybe you live alone, there's not a lot going on, then it's possible that these brain exercises that you can pay for on the computer could be helpful for you. I put the name of a task up here that has an app. Then there are free versions that you can get. It's called the Dual N-Back task. And there's actually research out of Johns Hopkins that shows that this task in particular, when you do it for 20 to 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, actually shows improvement in working memory. And it doesn't show it here, but also attention and problem solving, and in addition to word finding. So this one task in particular has a lot of research to support it. So I recommend that one in particular. Okay. I know that was a lot of information, but I think we have time for some questions. I'm happy to answer them because I know that, again, that was a lot of information, but you'll get all of it in writing. I didn't want you to be taking notes while listening to me because guess what? That's multitasking. Right? So that's why I really wanted to encourage you to wait till after the presentation to get those notes.
Jessie, thank you so much. I learned seriously so much. And I think most of us, well, I'll speak for myself, I pride myself on multitasking, as I think many of us do. And everything you said made perfect sense of why it's not a good thing to be doing. And especially when we really do have to save our brain energy. So thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if somebody wants to raise your hand and ask a question or put it in the chat, it's whatever your comfort level is. Feel free, because Karen, do you have your hand up?
Somebody asked about Macaroni Union. I don't know. It's a band, apparently, a group. Never heard of them before.
I think the name is Marconi, not macaroni.
Oh my gosh. Is it true?
That's what it said on the
the
bottom
slide?
of the video that you showed. I think
That's
they're called
so
Marconi.
I'm so glad you said that because that's their name in my head. I don't know if that makes more or less sense, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Marconi invented the radio.
See, I learned something every day. Marconi invented. Okay, well, that makes a lot more sense. I need to look
it's just how your brain sees something. Like if you look at it quickly, I could so see how you see macaroni.
Funny though. I even have that in my playlist. It comes up all the time. That's funny. Thank you.
Karen, you can use the chat if we can't hear you. And I don't know if anybody else has any questions.
Could you say, excuse me, could you say a bit more about the Hopkins memory task? I remember hearing you say that, but I don't recall the content.
Yes, that's a great question. I actually didn't go into it in detail here because once you learn how to do it, it's fairly easy. I'll say it's still a brain challenge, and that's important. But it's too hard to explain in this setting. But actually, one of the handouts that I'm going to give you are instructions that I've written out how to do that task and exactly where you can find or the name of the app itself. And there's several of them, and I've written the one that I recommend that seems to be the most user-friendly. But that's a great question. It's hard to explain. I can touch on it a little bit. The reason that it's called Dual N-Back is because the task requires you to remember two things at a time. So you're going to see a grid on your phone or computer, see a grid, and you're going to see boxes in that grid that move from screen to screen. Okay. One screen will show the box in one place. And then the next time you see it, it will have moved. Okay. So one of the things you have to remember is the location of that box. But not only are you going to see a box pop up, you're also going to hear a letter. So now you have to remember both the letter and the location of the box. And when the screen changes, they're going to give you another letter and move that location. And you have to decide whether the location of the box matched the screen before and if the letter you heard matched the screen before. Okay, so that's remembering one back. The task gets harder and harder over time because it starts to ask you to remember two back. So you've got to hold on to two before, and then three back and four back and so on. Whoo! I've never gotten there. I've gotten to three back, but I haven't trained it every day. But it is, it really does require your focused attention, which is one of those principles of neuroplasticity. It doesn't really engage in tasks that's meaningful or salient to you, but again, it's research based. So that's just a little snippet. Yeah. Any other questions?
I can read from the chat.
Okay.
Cancer diagnosis / treatment is a very emotional process. How do we ensure that the emotional stress does not impact our brain health?
A great question. I think that's why I included the information about how important it is to manage your stress and things like anxiety and depression. So there are many, many, many ways to do that. I've touched on a few ideas here, mindfulness meditation, exercise, breathing techniques. Actually, another one of the handouts, I didn't even mention it, is a list of 3 different relaxation techniques, in addition to the ones that I already mentioned. So I think it's important for each person to be aware of how they're feeling and know that there are resources out there that can support you. And taking the time to look into that and knowing that you need that self-care is a huge part of taking care of your brain. You probably don't think of it that way in general, but managing that depression and those feelings are really important. So, I don't want to speak too much about that because it starts to get outside of my scope of practice as a speech therapist and not a behavioral therapist, right? But there are many, many resources, and I'm sure Hope Connections can help with that as well, right?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that,
Yeah.
that Hope Connections, not only do we have mindfulness classes and exercise classes and meditation classes, but I also, as an oncology social worker, really see that even being part of a support group can increase validation. And I think that we all need to feel validated in all that we've been through and all that we're going through. And also, it decreases isolation. And sometimes we really go inwards when we are going through something difficult, which is natural. But I think the more support and community we have, the better we do physically, emotionally, because as we all know, there's that mind-body connection. And I know we know that intellectually, but I think sometimes, we forget when we are feeling so emotional. So thank you so much for asking that great question. So next question. Somebody wrote, joining a Hope Connection support group was the single most helpful thing for me in dealing with the emotional stress of cancer. Highly recommend them. Thank you. That's the best compliment. So I hope everybody will think about that if you're not already participating in a group or a mind-body class, or even just these educational programs. We learn so much. And I think even just coming together and seeing that other people are interested in the same topic or feeling something similar. So just wanted to add that. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Actually, can I just piggyback on that? Because that made me think of something. We were talking about how the brain needs energy to function. And the brain is responsible for not just moving our body or our thoughts. It's also responsible for our emotions and our feelings, right? And that can take brain energy as well. So that's just another reason I think that another factor that contributes to chemo brain and brain fog is just that emotional piece draining more of the brain's energy. And that just speaks to why it's so important to take care of it.
And we have another question in the chat. Do you recommend sleep aids?
Again, I think it's just individual. Each individual may have different strategies that work for them. I know it's important to talk with your physician if you're having difficulty sleeping. And I feel like that's the first place to go to because they'll have the best recommendations medically in terms of how to manage that. And there are lots of, there are over-the-counter things that you can take. But again, it's important to talk to your doctor about that to make sure it's not going to interfere with any other treatments that you're doing. But just in general, in terms of behavior, those are the kinds of things I wanted to focus on tonight, is the behaviors that you can do to help you sleep. And then your doctor can talk about more of the pharmacological or other types of medical strategies. One thing I didn't mention here is we know it's really important to stay off our screens right before going to bed, or at the very least, there are glasses you can put on. They're kind of like sunglasses that keep the blue light from, affecting your brain if you have to be on a screen at night. So again, those are some habits that you may be in that you could change that can help your brain health over time. It's all about learning new habits, I think. A lot of the things I mentioned tonight is just something different or new that you could be doing that, promotes your brain health.
No more questions?
So I have one question.
Okay.
Kind of getting back to talking about like the emotional stress and just how having a lot of on your mind can affect it. I find, I do a lot with to-do lists and my calendar and trying to maximize, and prioritize and all of that. But I find some days I'm just so overwhelmed, be it with, just all the logistics of everything, and then adding emotional stress on top of that I just feel really overwhelmed. And I feel like that definitely contributes to being able to focus, or whether or not I'm able to focus or get things done. Do you have any sort of recommendations for that, or how that can kind of impact the brain fog and chemo brain?
Yeah, 100%. I think that what you're getting at is a perfect example of when those brain breaks or rest breaks become really important. So that feeling of being overwhelmed and to the point where it starts to affect your ability to concentrate really is a sign that your brain is tired, your brain is fatigued. So it's really important to notice when that's happening and try to take even a 2-minute break. Stop for a second and just rest your brain and then get back to the task at hand. If you take your 2-minute rest and you still don't feel ready to get back to it, take a few minutes longer. And the research shows us that the more you can be aware of your brain's need for rest and to take those breaks when you need them, the better you are at building your brain's endurance, and you'll feel better more of the time. Now, again, that's just one suggestion. And I know there are a lot of things that you're juggling, but that would be the best strategy, a best place to start is to just try to be aware of when you need a break and take a break. And you may be surprised at how much of an impact that can have on your day-to-day life. But it really does take a lot of discipline and attention, paying attention to how you're feeling. I see somebody said, walking every day has helped me immensely with stress. Yes, I believe that. Seeing the leaves, hearing the birds. Yep. And you said it's a very nice break. I think that's well said, because it probably is a break from all the other things you're thinking about or all the other things you're doing during the day. So that makes a lot of sense to me. You're welcome, Elena.
Something that I have learned is that not every sleep medicine prescribed by a physician is good for your brain. My experience was getting one or two, I can't remember what, and my pharmacist said as I collected the medicine, this is not good for your brain. And I was shocked because it came from my physician.
Mhm. Wow. That's a good point. I think it takes a lot of energy to advocate for yourself. And that's a good example of, making sure you're asking your doctor those kinds of questions. Yeah, I'm really glad that pharmacist did their job well for you.
Another thing I discovered was I think the medicine was, it's a little patch called ZLEEP, Sleep, ZLEEP, okay? And I had used this in the past. And then I came across, I don't remember where, it said that, and I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, ashwagandha, someone you can do that correctly. I'm not doing it well. That can interfere with your thyroid. That was shocking because I had used it in the past, and then comes this little nugget of information. So I guess we need to really research anything that we take for sleep because it's scary out there.
Mhm. I think your pharmacist is probably a good resource too, because they're usually aware of all the medications that you're taking, and how they could interact. And so that's a great resource.
Well, we have time for one more question if somebody has one. And Jessie's going to send me her slides, and so I'll be able to share that with everybody because I think, to your point, that was really helpful to be able to go back and to review these. And I think these are all such good reminders and things tips that we can actually really put into practice. And as you said, some of them are easier said than done, but there are things that we can actively do to help our brains and help our memories and hopefully, make us feel more in control and stronger, because when we're not feeling, now I'm trying to get the word out, right, when we don't either have our words or feel like we have the brain capacity to do the things that we want to do, that's really discouraging. So I'm really encouraged by everything that you shared here. It was really so informative and helpful. And I'm so happy that all of you came here today for this talk. And I'm going to be sending out an evaluation at some point this week. And if you can fill it out, that's really helpful for us in terms of all of our programming. And Jessie, thank you so much again for being here with us tonight and for sharing such really good information.
Yeah, it really was my pleasure. So thank you so much for having me. It was nice meeting you guys, and best of luck to everybody, really.
Thank you,
Thank
Jessica.
you. And I hope everybody has a good night. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.